A hunter saved a pregnant lynx that was dying, but a year later, a cry from the forest brought him to tears. What he discovered will touch your heart. Watch until the end and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. There was something almost sacred in the way Ethan Miller walked through the forest, as if each step was a silent reverence to the life that pulsed within it. Every morning he left early from the small cabin he had built years ago at the boundary between the buffer zone of the Olympic National Park and the restricted use area in Washington state. By choice, he lived far from the city and its noise, finding purpose in the trails he patrolled as a volunteer and in the notes he meticulously filled in notebooks stained by time. He was a man of simple routines, but an attentive soul, accustomed to noticing almost invisible nuances, the out-of-place silence, the subtle trail of footprints in the moist earth, the recent scent of animal presence. On that autumn morning, however, something was different. The cutting cold brought with it a kind of restlessness that he couldn't name. The trail he followed seemed quieter than normal, as if the natural sounds of the forest were suspended for some unknown reason. It was in this silence that he heard a fragile and broken sound, not the typical alarm of a bird or the dry warning of a deer on alert, but a muffled moan, almost human. Guided only by instinct, he pushed aside dry branches until he found, huddled under a rock formation, a female North American lynx in a visible state of agony. She was injured, exhausted, and breathing with difficulty, but there was something even more alarming. Her slightly distended belly indicated advanced pregnancy. It was a rare and precious sign, considering that this feline was one of the most endangered species on the continent. Ethan knew there was no time to lose. With calm and firm movements, he improvised a stretcher with what he had on hand and wrapped her in his own jacket to protect her from the cold. The return walk was long and exhausting, with the weight of the animal in his arms and the fragile hope that there was still salvation. The lynx was handed over to the care of a small rehabilitation center that operated discreetly a few miles away, specializing in the rescue of wildlife. There, tests confirmed the pregnancy and the severity of the injuries. In the days that followed, he visited the center whenever he could, observing from a distance without interfering, just monitoring the progress of the recovery. A silent bond was created between the two, a kind of trust that didn't need to be expressed in gestures or sounds. Over time, the female recovered. Against all expectations, she survived the trauma and completed the pregnancy. Those responsible for the center, however, decided to postpone her reintroduction to nature until the cubs were strong enough to live on their own. And so, life went back to following its normal course, at least on the surface. "I think she's ready to be released now," said Dr. Sarah Thompson, the wildlife veterinarian who had been overseeing the lynx's care. Her auburn hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, and her green eyes held both professional determination and genuine compassion. Ethan nodded, his weathered face revealing a mix of relief and concern. "What about the cubs?" "They're thriving. It's unusual to see such a successful recovery in captivity, especially with a pregnant female." Sarah flipped through her clipboard, double-checking her notes. "We typically lose at least one cub, but all three of hers are healthy and developing right on schedule." Ethan's gaze drifted to the enclosure where the lynx rested with her cubs. He remembered the day he found her, how fragile she had seemed, and how against all odds she had fought to survive. In the months since the rescue, he'd become a fixture at the rehabilitation center, volunteering his time beyond his forest patrols. The staff had come to expect his quiet presence, his thoughtful questions, and his intuitive understanding of the animals in their care. "When will you release them?" Ethan asked, his voice low and measured as it always was. At 53, he had the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of self-sufficiency and solitude. The lines around his eyes spoke of days spent in the sun and his calloused hands testified to a life of practical work. Sarah hesitated. "That's actually what I wanted to discuss with you. The director thinks we should release them near where you found the mother. It's clearly suitable Lynx territory, and she was surviving there before her injury." She paused, studying his reaction. "But I wanted your input. You know that area better than anyone." Ethan considered the request. The location where he had found the injured lynx was less than 2 miles from his cabin, in a secluded valley that few hikers ever visited. It was rich with small game and natural shelter, perfect for a lynx family trying to establish territory. "It's a good area," he confirmed, "but there's been increased activity on the western ridge. Some hikers going off-trail, probably looking for those waterfalls that were featured in that travel magazine last month." Sarah frowned. "That's not ideal. These lynx need minimal human contact to maintain their wild instincts, especially the cubs." "There's another spot," Ethan offered after a moment. "A little further north. Similar terrain, but more isolated. I haven't seen human tracks there in years." As they discussed the potential release sites, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was shifting. For months, he had watched these animals heal and grow, becoming inadvertently entangled in their story. The mother lynx had come to recognize him, her golden eyes tracking his movements without fear whenever he approached her enclosure. The cubs, now nearly half-grown, were curious but cautious, as wild animals should be. "I think we should do the release at dawn," Ethan suggested. "Less chance of any hikers being around." Sarah nodded in agreement. "That's what we were thinking too. Would you? Would you want to be there? I know it's not standard protocol to have volunteers present, but given your involvement from the beginning..." Her voice trailed off, leaving the invitation open. Ethan felt a sudden tightness in his chest. He had rescued countless animals over his 15 years as a park volunteer, but few had affected him as deeply as this lynx family. "I'd like that," he said simply. Later that evening, as Ethan prepared his evening meal in his cabin, his thoughts remained with the Lynx family. The solitary life he had built for himself after leaving behind a promising career in environmental law had brought him peace, but also a kind of isolation that sometimes weighed heavily. Tomorrow's release would mark the end of a chapter, a return to the natural order of things. As darkness fell outside his window, Ethan Miller couldn't have known that the story was far from over, or that the bond forged in that moment of rescue would soon be tested in ways he could never have anticipated. The forest that had been his sanctuary was about to reveal secrets that would challenge everything he thought he knew about the delicate balance between humans and the wild. The morning of the release arrived with a heavy mist that clung to the forest floor like a translucent blanket. Ethan had barely slept, his mind racing with thoughts of the Lynx family and what lay ahead for them. He rose before dawn, packed his gear methodically, and set out toward the meeting point he and Sarah had agreed upon. The rehabilitation center's van was already parked at the trailhead when he arrived. Sarah stood beside it, her breath visible in the crisp morning air, while 2 assistants carefully unloaded the transport cages. "Morning," Ethan said, approaching the group. "Everything go okay with the transfer?" Sarah nodded, her expression both professional and apprehensive. The mother was calm. The cubs were a bit agitated, but that's normal. They're healthy and ready. She glanced at her watch. "We should start moving. I want to get them settled before the sun rises completely." The hike to the release site took nearly an hour, made more challenging by the weight of the cages and the need to move quietly through the forest. By the time they reached the small clearing Ethan had selected, the first rays of sunlight were beginning to filter through the trees, turning the lingering mist into a golden haze. "This is perfect," Sarah whispered, surveying the area. Dense undergrowth provided ample cover. A small stream offered fresh water, and the rocky outcropping to the north would serve as shelter during inclement weather. Far better than where we initially planned. Ethan merely nodded, helping to position the cages. The mother lynx was alert now, her golden eyes fixed on him with an intensity that seemed to communicate something beyond animal recognition. The cubs, nearly 6 months old, pressed against the sides of their separate cages, their spotted fur rippling with nervous energy. "We'll open the mother's cage first," Sarah instructed her team. "Give her time to assess the area before we release the cubs. Remember, no sudden movements, no unnecessary noise." As the cage door swung open, everyone held their breath. For several long moments, the female lynx remained motionless, her nose twitching as she processed the sense of her new surroundings. Then, with deliberate grace, she emerged from the cage and padded silently to the edge of the clearing, where she turned to look back at the humans and her still confined offspring. "She's waiting for them," Ethan murmured, recognizing the behavior. "She won't leave without her cubs." Sarah gave the signal, and the assistants carefully opened the remaining cages. The cubs hesitated only briefly before racing to their mother, their movements awkward yet determined. The family reunion was brief but poignant. A quick nuzzling, a check of sense. And then, as if responding to some silent command, all 4 lynxes disappeared into the underbrush. "That's it," Sarah said, the relief evident in her voice. A textbook release. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary had just transpired. The way the mother lynx had looked at him before disappearing. It was as if she had recognized him, acknowledged him, perhaps even communicated something to him. He dismissed the thought as anthropomorphism, a tendency he usually avoided. "We'll monitor the area with trail cameras," Sarah was saying as they packed up the empty cages. "Minimal human presence for at least the first month. We want them to establish their territory naturally, without associating it with people." Ethan hesitated before asking, "Would it be a problem if I checked the cameras occasionally? I'm in this area almost daily anyway." Sarah considered him, her expression softening. "Actually, that would be helpful. Just leave any food scraps or potential attractants at home, and document anything unusual in the logbook at the center." The walk back was lighter, the empty cages no longer weighing them down. Sarah and her team chatted quietly about the success of the release and their hopes for the Lynx family's future. Ethan remained silent, lost in his own thoughts, wrestling with the unexpected emptiness he felt now that his daily visits to the rehabilitation center would come to an end. At the trailhead, as the team loaded their equipment into the van, Sarah approached Ethan. "You know," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, "we could always use more volunteers at the center. Someone with your experience would be invaluable." Ethan felt a flicker of interest, but shook his head. "I'm better in the field than around people," he admitted. Sarah's laugh was unexpected and warm. "Fair enough, but the offer stands." She handed him a small device. "This is linked to the trail cameras. It'll alert you if there's significant movement in the release area. Saves you having to physically check each camera." "Thanks," Ethan said, genuinely surprised by the gesture. "I'll keep an eye on things." As the van pulled away, Ethan stood alone at the trailhead, the monitoring device a small weight in his pocket. He hadn't anticipated how empty his routine would feel without the daily visits to check on the Lynx family. For months, they had been a fixed point in his solitary existence, a reminder of connection in a life largely defined by isolation. The days that followed settled into a new pattern. Ethan continued his regular patrols, but found himself drawn repeatedly to the release site, checking the monitoring device for updates. The cameras captured occasional glimpses of the Lynx family, the mother teaching her cubs to hunt, the young ones practicing their climbing skills on fallen logs. Each sighting reassured him that they were adapting well to their freedom. 2 weeks after the release, however, something began to change. The monitoring device showed increased activity near his cabin, far from the release site. At first, Ethan dismissed it as routine wildlife movement, perhaps a deer or even a black bear, common enough in these parts. But when he reviewed the footage, he was startled to see one of the lynx cubs, easily identifiable by a distinctive marking on its ear, prowling around the perimeter of his property. "What are you doing so far from your mother?" Ethan murmured to himself, watching the cub's cautious exploration. The behavior was unusual. Lynx cubs typically stayed close to their mother for the first year of life, learning essential survival skills under her guidance. Concerned, Ethan contacted Sarah. "One of the cubs is ranging far from the release site," he explained when she answered. "Nearly 2 miles, all the way to my cabin." "That's unexpected," Sarah admitted, "but not necessarily concerning yet. Cubs can be curious, and if it's finding enough food, it might be establishing an early territory of its own." "It seems too young for that," Ethan countered. "And why my cabin specifically?" "Animals are drawn to familiar scents," Sarah suggested. "You were present throughout their time at the center. Your scent might represent safety in some way." The explanation made logical sense, but it didn't fully satisfy Ethan's intuition that something more complex was at play. He decided to monitor the situation more closely, setting up additional cameras around his property. What he discovered over the next few days both fascinated and troubled him. The cub, the smallest of the 3, which the rehabilitation staff had unofficially named Runt, was making regular excursions to his cabin, always alone, always cautious. More remarkably, on the 3rd night it left a small offering, a freshly caught rabbit, on Ethan's doorstep before disappearing back into the forest. "It's bringing me gifts," Ethan told Sarah during their next call, unable to keep the wonder from his voice. "Like a house cat bringing prey to its owner." "That's highly unusual behavior for a wild lynx," Sarah said, her tone shifting from professional interest to concern. "It suggests a level of habituation that could be problematic for its survival." "Or something else entirely," Ethan countered, though he couldn't articulate what that something else might be. Sarah sighed. "We might need to recapture Runt and assess whether it's suitable for wild release. Some animals become too imprinted on humans during rehabilitation." "No," Ethan said, more forcefully than he'd intended. "Give it time. It's still hunting successfully, still returning to its family. This might just be temporary." "Ethan," Sarah's voice softened, "I understand you've formed a connection with these animals, but our priority has to be their successful reintegration into the wild. If one of them is showing signs of human dependency—" "It's not dependency," Ethan interrupted. "It's something else. Trust me on this." The silence on the other end of the line stretched uncomfortably before Sarah finally agreed. "1 week. We'll give it 1 week to see if the behavior changes. But if it continues, we'll have to intervene." After hanging up, Ethan sat on his porch, the monitoring device in his hand, watching the forest line for any sign of the lynx cub. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the clearing in front of his cabin. He couldn't explain, even to himself, why he felt so strongly that Runt should be left alone, why he was so certain that the cub's behavior wasn't a problem, but rather a fascinating anomaly worth understanding. As darkness fell, Ethan remained vigilant, sensing that the mystery of the Lynx family was only beginning to unfold. Unknown to him, deeper in the forest, forces were already in motion that would soon connect their fates in ways neither human nor animal could possibly anticipate. The week Sarah had granted Ethan to observe Runt's behavior passed quickly, marked by increasingly frequent visits from the young lynx. Each night, the cub would approach the cabin cautiously, leave small offerings, sometimes prey, other times unusual forest items like a distinctive pine cone or colorful feather, and then vanish back into the darkness. Ethan documented everything, meticulously filling his field journal with observations that defied conventional wildlife behavior. On the seventh night, as rain pounded against the cabin roof, Ethan was startled by a sound at his door, unlike the usual soft padding of Lynx. Pause. It was a deliberate scratch, almost like a knock. Setting aside his coffee mug, he approached the door cautiously and opened it to find Runt huddled on the porch, soaking wet and shivering. "Hey there," Ethan said softly, crouching down to the cub's level. "You picked a bad night for a visit." The young lynx made no attempt to flee, instead staring at Ethan with eyes that seemed to hold an impossible intelligence. After a moment's hesitation, Ethan stepped back, holding the door wider. "This breaks every rule in the book," he murmured, "but I can't leave you out in this." To his amazement, Runt understood the invitation, padding cautiously into the cabin and shaking water from its coat before settling near the wood stove. Ethan kept his distance, knowing that despite the cub's apparent comfort around him, it remained a wild animal with unpredictable reactions. As the night progressed, Ethan observed the young lynx's behavior with fascination. Runt explored the cabin methodically, sniffing at books and furniture, occasionally returning to the warmth of the stove. When Ethan prepared a simple dinner, the cub watched attentively, but made no move to beg for food, a behavior that would have indicated problematic habituation. "You're not looking for handouts, are you?" Ethan said, more to himself than to the lynx. "You're looking for something else entirely." By morning, the rain had stopped, and Runt showed clear signs of wanting to leave. Ethan opened the door, watching as the cub paused at the threshold, looked back once, and then bounded into the forest with renewed energy. The encounter left Ethan with more questions than answers. He knew he should report it to Sarah immediately. A wild lynx entering a human dwelling represented a level of habituation that would raise serious concerns. But something held him back. The interaction hadn't felt like a wild animal seeking food or shelter. It had felt like a deliberate connection, a choice made by the cub to bridge the gap between their worlds. Before he could resolve his internal debate, his satellite phone rang. It was Jessica Parker, the park's head ranger and Ethan's nominal supervisor. "Ethan," her voice was tense, lacking its usual friendly tone, "we've got a situation. How fast can you get to the North Ridge access road?" 20 minutes on the ATV, he replied, instantly alert. "What's happening?" "Development company bulldozers moved in at dawn. They've already cleared about an acre of forest just outside the park boundary. We need all hands on deck to ensure they haven't encroached on protected land." Ethan's stomach tightened. Bradford Development? The very same. Looks like Jason. Bradford is making good on his threats to build that resort complex. I've got the survey maps, but we need to physically mark the boundaries before they accidentally take down more trees than they're entitled to. "I'll be right there," Ethan promised, already gathering his gear. The scene at the North Ridge was worse than Ethan had anticipated. Heavy machinery had carved ugly gashes into the forest floor, and stacks of felled trees lined the newly created access road. Jason Bradford himself stood near a temporary trailer, his expensive hiking boots incongruous with the construction site, his handsome face set in lines of determined ambition. "Miller," Bradford acknowledged Ethan's arrival with a curt nod. They had history, unpleasant history that stretched back to their college days at the University of Washington, where they'd been roommates with radically different values. "Still playing Forest Guardian, I see." Ethan ignored the taunt, joining Jessica by the survey equipment. "How bad is it?" "They're within their legal rights so far," she admitted grimly. "The land was rezoned last year after that council vote. But they're pushing it, coming right up to the buffer zone boundary." Ethan studied the maps, his concern growing. "This is less than 3 miles from the Lynx release site," he said quietly, ensuring Bradford couldn't overhear. "The noise alone could disrupt their territory establishment." Jessica's expression tightened. "I know." And there's not much we can do about it if they stay on their side of the line. The rezoning battle was lost before we even knew it had begun. Throughout the day, Ethan helped Jessica mark the exact boundaries of the protected area, acutely aware of Bradford watching their every move. The development magnate had made no secret of his desire to build an exclusive wilderness resort that would, in his words, make nature accessible to those who appreciate the finer things in life. The project had divided the local community, with many welcoming the potential economic boost, while others, like Ethan, saw it as the beginning of the end for the area's fragile ecosystem. As the sun began to set, Jessica pulled Ethan aside. "There's something else you should know," she said, her voice low. "Bradford's got political connections pushing for a reclassification of the Lynx's endangered status in this region. If he succeeds, the protection protocols would be weakened significantly." Ethan felt a cold anger settle in his chest. On what grounds? Some questionable research suggesting the population is more robust than previously thought. It's flimsy science, but with enough money behind it. She left the implication hanging. On the drive back to his cabin, Ethan's mind raced with the implications of Bradford's development. He hadn't mentioned Runt's visits to Jessica, an omission that now felt significant. If the authorities knew that a recently released lynx was showing unusual behavior around humans, it could potentially strengthen Bradford's argument that the species didn't need such stringent protection. The cabin was dark when he arrived, but Ethan immediately sensed he wasn't alone. Switching on the porch light, he found not only Runt waiting for him, but the mother lynx as well, her imposing presence, commanding the small clearing in front of his home. "Well," Ethan breathed, remaining perfectly still, "this is unexpected." The mother lynx regarded him with the same penetrating intelligence he'd observed in her cub. After a long moment, she turned and melted into the forest, leaving Runt behind. The message seemed clear. She was aware of, and perhaps even sanctioning, her cub's unusual relationship with the human. That night, as Runt again took shelter in the cabin, Ethan made a decision. He would contact Dr. Maya Reynolds, a renowned wildlife behaviorist he'd worked with years ago on wolf reintroduction programs. If anyone could help him understand what was happening with the Lynx family and potentially protect them from Bradford's machinations, it would be Maya. The call to Maya went to voicemail, so Ethan left a carefully worded message, sharing just enough to pique her scientific curiosity without revealing the full extent of the situation. As he hung up, Runt approached, dropping something at his feet. It was a tattered leather bracelet, weathered and stained, with faint initials still visible on the inside. Ethan's heart nearly stopped. The bracelet had belonged to his younger brother, Aaron Miller, who had disappeared in these woods during a solo hiking trip 15 years ago. The official search had been abandoned after 3 weeks, and Aaron had been presumed lost to the wilderness, another tragic statistic in the park's history. With trembling hands, Ethan picked up the bracelet, memories flooding back with painful clarity. Aaron had been 25, a promising wildlife photographer with a particular interest in predator species. His disappearance had been the catalyst for Ethan's decision to leave his law career and move to the cabin, initially to continue the search and later to maintain a connection to the place his brother had loved so deeply. "Where did you find this?" he whispered to Runt, knowing the question was futile but unable to contain it. The lynx merely watched him, tail twitching slightly, before moving to the door with clear intent. Ethan hesitated only briefly before grabbing his jacket and flashlight. It was reckless to follow a wild animal into the forest at night, but the bracelet in his hand outweighed all rational considerations. Runt led him deeper into the forest than Ethan had anticipated, following game trails that eventually gave way to barely perceptible paths. After nearly an hour, they reached a secluded valley Ethan had never explored, despite his extensive knowledge of the park. Here, the lynx paused, looking back expectantly. Ethan's flashlight beam revealed a small cave entrance, partially obscured by vegetation. As he approached, he noticed unusual markings around the opening, not natural formations, but deliberate engravings that resembled crude animal figures. With growing wonder, he realized he'd stumbled upon something archaeologists and park officials had long sought: evidence of ancient human habitation in this remote section of the park. But it was what lay just inside the cave entrance that made Ethan's knees weak. A weathered backpack, unmistakably modern, propped against the wall. And beside it, a camera, the expensive Nikon his brother had always carried. Aaron. Ethan whispered, his voice breaking on the name he'd rarely allowed himself to speak aloud in 15 years. You were here. As the implications washed over him, Ethan became aware of movement in the darkness behind him. Turning slowly, he found himself face to face with the entire Lynx family, mother and all 3 cubs, watching him with that same unsettling intelligence. And in that moment, Ethan began to understand that the connection between his family and these remarkable animals might stretch back much further than he had ever imagined. With hands that wouldn't stop trembling, Ethan lifted his brother's camera from where it had rested for 15 years. The battery was long dead, but the memory card might still be intact, might still hold the last images Aaron had captured before his disappearance. Slipping the card into his pocket, Ethan turned his attention to the backpack, carefully opening it to find Aaron's journal inside, the pages yellowed but preserved by the dry cave environment. I can't believe this, Ethan whispered, thumbing through the journal to find Aaron's familiar handwriting, entries that continued far beyond the date of his disappearance. His brother hadn't perished immediately. He'd survived in this place, at least for a while. The Lynx family remained at the cave entrance, watching his every move with unnerving focus. Ethan couldn't help but wonder at the remarkable intelligence in their eyes, at how they seemed to understand something about this place that he was only beginning to grasp. "Thank you," he said to them, feeling simultaneously foolish and profoundly grateful. The mother lynx made a soft, churring sound, then turned and padded away, 2 of her cubs following obediently. Only Runt remained, sitting just outside the cave, apparently waiting for Ethan. Gathering Aaron's belongings with reverent care, Ethan followed the lynx cub back through the forest. The return journey seemed shorter, though dawn was breaking by the time they reached the cabin. Exhausted but too wired to sleep, Ethan sat at his kitchen table and began to read his brother's journal. The early entries were predictable. Aaron's excitement about photographing the notoriously elusive lynx population, his determination to venture deeper into restricted areas than any other photographer had dared. Then came the entry dated 3 days after his official disappearance. Something incredible happened today. I followed a female lynx to a valley I've never seen on any park map. There's a cave system there with Native American petroglyphs unlike any I've documented before. The figures seem to depict humans and lynx in various scenes, hunting together, sharing territory. While photographing them, I lost my footing and fell badly. My leg is definitely broken, and I'm too far from any trail for help. But the strangest thing, the lynx I was following returned with her mate. They've been bringing me food. Small game they've caught. It's as if they understand I'm injured. I know it sounds crazy, but I swear there's intelligence in their eyes that goes beyond animal instinct. Ethan paused, goosebumps rising on his arms. The parallels to his own experience with Runt were undeniable. He read on, finding increasingly detailed accounts as the days progressed. Day 12. The pain is worse, likely infection setting in. The Lynx family remains, caring for me in their way. I've been studying the cave drawings more closely. They tell a story, I believe, of an unusual relationship between the indigenous people who once lived here and the lynx population. A relationship of mutual respect and territory sharing. I found artifacts deeper in the cave system, stone tools, remnants of ancient offerings. This place was sacred to someone once. The final entry, dated nearly a month after Aaron's disappearance, was written in a shaky hand. I'm growing weaker. The lynx continue to bring me food, but I can't eat much now. I've made peace with what's happening. These remarkable animals have shown me something profound about connection across species. If I'm found, I hope Ethan will understand. He always felt the pull of the wild too, though he tried to deny it. I've left markers that might help searchers find this place someday. I hope someone discovers what I've learned about these extraordinary creatures. Ethan set the journal down, his mind reeling. His brother had survived for weeks after disappearing, had been cared for by wild lynx in a manner that defied conventional understanding of animal behavior. And now, 15 years later, the offspring of those same lynx, perhaps even the same female, had led him to this discovery. His satellite phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. It was Maya Reynolds. Ethan. Her voice was warm with familiarity despite the years since they'd last spoken. Your message was intriguing, to say the least. A wild lynx cub bringing gifts and visiting your cabin? That's not standard behavior for a recently released animal. It's gotten more complicated since I called, Ethan admitted, unsure how much to share. Maya was a scientist to her core, skeptical of anything that couldn't be measured and documented. If I send you some coordinates, how soon could you get here? I'm presenting at a conference in Seattle tomorrow, she replied. I could drive out the day after. Is this time sensitive? Potentially, there's a development project threatening the area. And I think, Ethan hesitated, I think there's something special about this lynx family, something worth protecting beyond the normal conservation arguments. Maya's laugh was gentle but skeptical. You sound like you've been in the woods alone too long, my friend, but I'm interested. Send me the details and I'll be there. After hanging up, Ethan inserted Aaron's memory card into his laptop. Most of the images were what he'd expected, beautiful wildlife shots, particularly of the lynx Aaron had been tracking. But the final images made his breath catch, detailed photographs of the cave petroglyphs showing humans and lynx in scenes of coexistence, hunting partnerships, and what appeared to be ritual gatherings around a central stone formation in the hidden chamber Aaron had mentioned. The last photo was a selfie. Aaron looking pale and feverish, but with an expression of peace, sitting beside a female lynx with distinctive golden eyes. Ethan spent the rest of the day alternating between studying Aaron's journal and photographs and checking the monitoring devices for any unusual activity around the release site. Bradford's construction had intensified, the sound of machinery now audible even from Ethan's relatively distant cabin. He worried about the impact on the Lynx family's territory establishment, especially with the mother having cubs to protect. Late that afternoon, as Ethan was preparing to head out for his regular patrol, a black SUV pulled up outside his cabin. Dr. Sarah Thompson stepped out, her expression troubled. You're earlier than expected, Ethan greeted her, hiding his surprise. I've been trying to call you, she said, following him onto the porch. We've picked up some concerning data from the tracking collar on the mother lynx. Her movements have been erratic, bringing her dangerously close to the Bradford construction site. Ethan nodded, unsurprised. The noise and disturbance are likely confusing her. She's trying to establish territory boundaries in a rapidly changing environment. There's more, Sarah continued. We've received reports of unusual behavior. Multiple sightings of the cubs approaching the perimeter where the construction workers have set up camp. One worker claimed a cub stole his lunch right out of his hands. Ethan felt a chill. Which cub? From the description, it sounds like the smallest one, the one you call Runt. Ethan wasn't surprised. Runt had shown remarkable adaptability and curiosity, qualities that would serve the young lynx well in some circumstances, but could prove dangerous in others. Bradford's people won't hesitate to report this as problematic wildlife behavior, he said grimly. They'd love any excuse to weaken the protection protocols. Sarah nodded, her expression grim. That's why I came directly to you instead of filing an official report. We need to intervene before this escalates. I've contacted Dr. Maya Reynolds, Ethan said, making a quick decision. She's a behavioral specialist who might be able to help us understand what's happening with the Lynx family. Maya Reynolds. Sarah's eyebrows rose. I've read her work. She's brilliant but notoriously skeptical about anthropomorphizing wildlife behavior. Which is exactly why her assessment would carry weight, Ethan pointed out. If she confirms that this Lynx family is exhibiting unusually adaptive behavior rather than problematic habituation, it might help us make a stronger case for protecting their territory from Bradford's encroachment. Sarah considered this, then nodded slowly. It's worth a try. When is she arriving? Day after tomorrow, Ethan replied. In the meantime, I think we need to monitor the construction site more closely. If Bradford's people are deliberately encouraging the Lynx to approach, offering food to create a habituation problem, for instance, we need to document it. Agreed, Sarah said, but there's something else you should know. She hesitated, glancing toward the forest before continuing. The geological survey team Bradford hired has been exploring cave systems in the area. They claim they're assessing structural stability for the resort foundations, but I've heard rumors they've found something significant, possibly archaeological remains. Ethan felt his heart rate quicken. Where exactly are they looking? North Ridge area, about 3 miles from here, not far from where the mother Lynx has been spending most of her time lately. It was too close to Aaron's cave for comfort. If Bradford's team discovered the petroglyphs, they'd be required by law to report them, which would bring archaeological teams, media attention, and potentially years of disruption to the Lynx family's territory. I need to check something, Ethan said, making a quick decision. Can you stay here and monitor the tracking data? I'll be back before dark. Sarah looked surprised but nodded. Of course. Where are you going? Ethan was already gathering his gear to make sure we haven't missed anything important about these Lynx. I think I know why they're behaving so unusually. And if I'm right, it could change everything about how we approach their protection. As he headed into the forest, Ethan felt Runt's presence before he saw the young Lynx. The cub emerged from the underbrush, falling into step beside him as naturally as if they had been walking these trails together for years. In that moment, watching the wild animal choose to accompany him, Ethan understood that the connection between his family and these remarkable creatures was no coincidence. Aaron had discovered something profound in these woods 15 years ago, and now Ethan had been given the chance to protect it. The forest seemed to close around Ethan and Runt as they made their way toward the cave, the afternoon light filtering through the canopy in dappled patterns. With each step, Ethan felt an increasing sense of urgency. If Bradford's team discovered the archaeological site before he could properly document it and establish its significance, the entire area could be compromised. Runt moved with purpose, occasionally pausing to ensure Ethan was following, displaying a level of awareness that continually astounded him. When they reached the small valley, Ethan noticed fresh boot prints in the soft earth near the cave entrance, confirmation that Bradford's survey team had indeed been exploring the area. We need to work quickly, he murmured to Runt, who watched him with those intelligent golden eyes. Inside the cave, Ethan set up portable battery-powered lights and began a systematic documentation of everything he found. The petroglyphs were even more extensive than Aaron's photographs had suggested, covering the walls in scenes that depicted an unusual relationship between humans and Lynx spanning what appeared to be generations. In one sequence, a human figure offered something to a Lynx. In another, Lynx and humans hunted cooperatively. Deeper in the cave, Ethan found the chamber Aaron had mentioned. Archaeological artifacts were scattered throughout: stone tools, clay vessels with animal motifs, and what appeared to be ceremonial objects. At the center stood a flat stone altar, its surface worn smooth by time and use. Using his phone, Ethan carefully photographed everything, making sure to include scale markers. As he worked, Runt explored the chamber, occasionally sniffing at particular artifacts with interest. The young lynx's behavior reinforced Ethan's growing theory. This place held special significance for the lynx population, a significance that had somehow been passed down through generations. "This is why your mother brought her cubs back to this territory," Ethan said aloud. "This place means something to your family, doesn't it?" As if in answer, Runt approached the central altar and placed something upon it, a small object Ethan hadn't noticed the cub carrying. Moving closer, he saw it was another artifact, a small carved lynx figure that looked ancient, but was remarkably well preserved. The realization struck him. Runt had retrieved this from somewhere else, had deliberately brought it here to this specific location. "You've been collecting these," Ethan whispered, understanding dawning. "The gifts you brought to my cabin, they weren't random. You were showing me things that belong here." The implications were staggering. Not only was this site archaeologically significant, but it revealed a historical relationship between humans and lynx, unlike anything documented in scientific literature. If Ethan could establish that the current lynx family was behaviorally linked to this ancient site, it would create a preservation case that even Bradford's political connections couldn't easily dismiss. With renewed purpose, Ethan gathered Aaron's journal and the most compelling photographs, then carefully resealed the cave entrance to disguise recent activity. As they left the valley, he noticed Runt's behavior change. The cub became alert, ears forward, body tense. "What is it?" Ethan whispered, immediately scanning their surroundings. The answer came in the form of voices, human voices approaching from the direction of the construction site. Ethan quickly ducked behind a large fallen tree, gesturing for Runt to hide. To his relief, the young lynx seemed to understand, slipping into the dense underbrush and becoming virtually invisible. From his concealed position, Ethan could make out two figures walking along a game trail, Jason Bradford and a man in a suit who seemed out of place in the forest setting. "The geological report confirms it's stable enough for development," Bradford was saying, "and if there are any archaeological findings, we'll deal with them quietly. The last thing we need is a bunch of academics and tribal representatives tying this project up in court for years." To the other man nodded. "My clients are getting impatient, Jason. They've invested heavily in this resort concept, and they expect returns. The projected opening date needs to be firm." "It will be," Bradford assured him. "I've got someone working on reclassifying the Lynx protection status. Once that hurdle is cleared, we can expand the development footprint significantly." "And the environmental compliance officer? Thompson, is it?" Bradford's laugh was dismissive. "Dr. Thompson is a dedicated scientist with an unfortunate weakness for handsome, rugged outdoorsmen. My sources tell me she's spending quite a bit of time with our local forest hermit, Ethan Miller. A conflict of interest that might prove useful if she becomes problematic." Ethan felt a surge of anger at Bradford's casual dismissal of Sarah's professionalism, but remained motionless until the men had passed. When he was certain they were gone, he signaled to Runt, who emerged from hiding with the silent grace that made lynx such effective predators. "We need to get back," Ethan told the cub. "Things are more complicated than I thought." The return journey was tense, Ethan's mind racing with what he'd learned. Bradford wasn't just building a resort. He was systematically working to dismantle the protections that kept this forest and its inhabitants safe. And he was willing to use underhanded tactics, including undermining Sarah's professional credibility, to achieve his goals. When Ethan arrived back at his cabin, he found Sarah sitting on the porch, poring over printouts of tracking data. She looked up as he approached, her expression shifting from concentration to surprise when she noticed Runt trailing behind him. "That's not something you see every day," she said carefully. "The cub followed you all the way back?" "Not exactly," Ethan replied, deciding it was time for complete honesty. "Runt led me to a cave system in the North Valley. There's an archaeological site there, Sarah. Indigenous artifacts, petroglyphs, evidence of a historical relationship between humans and Lynx in this region." Sarah's professional reserve wavered as interest sparked in her eyes. "That's extraordinary. But what does it have to do with the current Lynx family's behavior?" "I think this Lynx lineage has a learned association with that specific site, passed down through generations," Ethan explained, retrieving Aaron's journal from his pack. "My brother documented it 15 years ago. He was cared for by a female Lynx, possibly the mother of our current female, when he was injured in that same cave system." Sarah took the journal with skeptical caution. "Ethan, that's a remarkable claim. Animals don't pass down cultural knowledge the way humans do." "Don't they?" Ethan challenged. "Orcas teach hunting techniques to their young. Elephants remember migration routes for generations. Why couldn't Lynx maintain a learned association with a specific territory that held historical significance for their species?" As Sarah began reading the journal, Ethan continued, "Bradford's team has been exploring the cave system. They know there's something archaeologically significant there, and they're deliberately keeping it quiet to avoid construction delays." Sarah looked up sharply. "That's illegal. Archaeological finds on federal land or adjacent to protected areas must be reported. Bradford doesn't care about legal. He cares about building his resort on schedule." Ethan hesitated, then added, "I overheard him talking with an investor. They're actively working to downgrade the Lynx's protection status, and they're planning to use our relationship to discredit you if necessary." A flush of anger colored Sarah's cheeks. "Our relationship? We're colleagues working on a conservation project." "Bradford is suggesting otherwise," Ethan said carefully. "He's implying that your scientific judgment might be compromised." Sarah's expression hardened. "That's outrageous. My work speaks for itself." She turned her attention back to Aaron's journal, flipping through the pages with increasing interest. "These observations are remarkably detailed. Your brother had a good scientific mind." "He was a photographer, but he understood animal behavior," Ethan said, a familiar ache of loss resurfacing. "He saw something special in the Lynx here, just as I have." As they discussed the implications of Aaron's journal and the archaeological site, Runt remained nearby, occasionally approaching to sniff at the tracking data printouts or to observe their conversation with that uncanny attentiveness. As night fell, Sarah reluctantly prepared to leave. "Maya Reynolds arrives tomorrow." "Right?" She confirmed, gathering her equipment. "I'll postpone filing any reports until we've had a chance to consult with her. But Ethan, we need to be careful. If Bradford is willing to play dirty, we need to make sure our case is airtight." After Sarah departed, Ethan sat on his porch, Aaron's journal open on his lap, watching as Runt explored the perimeter of the cabin's clearing before settling comfortably nearby. The young Lynx's presence was a tangible reminder of the extraordinary connection that seemed to link their stories across species and time. His satellite phone rang, piercing the evening quiet. It was Maya. "I'll be there earlier than expected," she said without preamble. "Caught an earlier flight, and I'm driving out first thing in the morning. Your message about the archaeological site changed everything. If you've actually found evidence of historical human-Lynx interactions, it could revolutionize our understanding of co-evolutionary relationships." "I have more than evidence," Ethan replied, watching Runt. "I have living proof." This Lynx cub has been retrieving artifacts from the cave system and bringing them back to a specific location within it. It's not random behavior, Maya. It's deliberate. The silence on the other end of the line stretched until Maya finally said, "If anyone else told me this, I'd assume they were experiencing isolation-induced anthropomorphic projection. But you've always been the most level-headed field observer I know." She paused again. "Ethan, if what you're describing is real, we need to document it thoroughly before going public. The scientific community will be skeptical, to put it mildly." "Skepticism is the least of our concerns," Ethan told her. "Bradford Development is actively working to undermine the Lynx protection protocols. If they succeed, this entire ecosystem could be at risk." "B, I understand." Maya's voice took on a new urgency. "I'll be there by noon tomorrow. Have everything ready. The journal, the photographs, any video documentation of the cub's behavior. And Ethan, be careful. People with money and power rarely appreciate those who stand in their way." After hanging up, Ethan turned to find Runt watching him intently, as if the young Lynx had understood every word of the conversation. "Tomorrow's going to be important," he told the cub, "for both our families." That night, as a storm gathered on the horizon, Ethan prepared for Maya's arrival, organizing Aaron's journal and photographs, along with his own documentation of Runt's behavior. The rain began just before midnight, a steady downpour that drummed against the cabin roof and turned the forest floor into a network of small rivulets and puddles. Ethan was awakened just before dawn by a frantic scratching at his door. Opening it, he found Runt soaked and agitated, making sharp, urgent sounds, unlike the cub's usual quiet communication. "What is it?" Ethan asked, instantly alert. "What's wrong?" Runt paced anxiously, then darted a few steps toward the forest. Before looking back expectantly, the message was clear: "Follow me." Throwing on his rain gear and grabbing a flashlight, Ethan plunged into the storm-darkened forest behind the determined young Lynx. What they found at the cave would change everything for Ethan, for the Lynx family, and for the future of the entire valley. The storm had triggered something unexpected, something that would bring the past rushing into the present with a force no one could have anticipated. And in that moment of revelation, the true nature of the bond between Ethan's family and the Lynx would finally be understood. The rain lashed at Ethan's face as he followed Runt through the forest, the beam of his flashlight barely penetrating the pre-dawn darkness. The young Lynx moved with determination, occasionally looking back to ensure Ethan was still following, leading him not to the cave's main entrance, but to what appeared to be a previously concealed secondary opening. The heavy rainfall had caused a minor landslide, revealing a narrow passage that had been hidden for who knew how long. Crouching to peer inside, Ethan's flashlight illuminated fresh paw prints in the mud, not just Runt's, but larger ones that likely belonged to the mother, Lynx. Following the tracks, Ethan squeezed through the tight opening, finding himself in a section of the cave system he hadn't explored before. The air here was different, warmer, with an earthy scent that spoke of long isolation from the outside world. "Hello?" Ethan called softly, unsure what he was expecting. The echo of his voice returned, followed by a silence that felt weighted with anticipation. Deeper in this new section, Ethan's light revealed more petroglyphs, these even more elaborate than those in the main chamber. Entire narratives etched into the stone walls, telling stories of humans and Lynx coexisting in a relationship that seemed to transcend the typical boundaries between people and wildlife. One sequence in particular caught his attention: figures that appeared to be caring for injured Lynx, and conversely, Lynx appearing to watch over injured humans. "It's a reciprocal relationship," Ethan murmured, understanding dawning. "A pact of mutual protection." Movement ahead drew his attention. In a small chamber, illuminated now by his flashlight, the mother Lynx stood watching him, her golden eyes reflecting the light. Behind her, something shifted in the shadows, something larger than a lynx cub. Ethan's heart nearly stopped as his beam revealed a human form, huddled against the cave wall. A man with a wild beard and hair that hadn't been cut in years, clothed in what appeared to be handmade garments of animal hide and plant fibers. Despite the radical transformation in his appearance, Ethan would have recognized those eyes anywhere. "Aaron," he whispered, his voice breaking on the name. The man blinked, in the sudden light, raising a hand to shield his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was rough from disuse, but unmistakable. "Ethan, you found me." For a moment, Ethan couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His brother whom he had mourned for 15 years, was alive. Somehow, impossibly, Aaron had survived all this time, living in this hidden section of the cave system. How? Was all Ethan could manage to say as he approached cautiously, afraid that if he moved too quickly, this apparition might disappear. Aaron gestured to the mother lynx, who had settled nearby, watching their reunion with apparent calm. "She saved me, her mother, actually. When I fell and broke my leg, I would have died here, but they brought me food, kept me warm." He smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "I healed eventually, but by then, I couldn't bring myself to leave. I had discovered something extraordinary here, Ethan. A relationship between humans and lynx that goes back thousands of years." Ethan sank to his knees beside his brother, still struggling to process the reality of finding him alive. "We searched for you," he said. "For weeks, we never found any trace." "I was deeper in the cave system by then," Aaron explained. "The original entrance to this section was hidden behind a rock fall. I only found it because I was following the lynx." He reached out to touch Ethan's arm, as if confirming his brother's solidity. "I left markers near the main entrance, hoping someone might find them someday. I came to live here," Ethan told him. "After you disappeared, I built a cabin nearby, became a park volunteer. I never stopped looking for answers." Aaron's eyes filled with understanding. "And now Lyra's daughter has brought you to me." "Lyra? The mother lynx who saved me. This is her daughter," Aaron explained, gesturing to the female lynx watching them. "And these are her cubs." As if on cue, all 3 cubs emerged from the shadows, including Runt, who immediately approached Ethan with familiar ease. "The smallest one has been visiting my cabin," Ethan said, "bringing me things, including your bracelet. That's how I found the main cave entrance." Aaron nodded, unsurprised. "They're intelligent, beyond anything science has documented, Ethan. They have a cultural memory that spans generations. The indigenous people who lived in this valley recognized it. They formed a covenant with the lynx, a mutual agreement to protect each other and this land." He gestured to the petroglyphs surrounding them. "It's all recorded here. I've spent years studying it, learning their language of sorts." Ethan looked around the chamber, noticing for the first time the evidence of long-term habitation, a sleeping area with furs, crude tools, containers made from natural materials, even primitive art supplies that Aaron had apparently used to create his own additions to the cave's visual history. "You've been living like this for 15 years, Ethan asked, struggling to comprehend his brother's choice. "Why didn't you try to come home?" Aaron's expression grew distant. "At first, I couldn't. My injuries were too severe. By the time I healed, I had discovered something that felt more important than my old life. These lynx are special, Ethan. They're not just animals. They're caretakers of this place, with a wisdom that predates our understanding." He gestured to the surrounding chamber. "I couldn't abandon them, not when I'd been entrusted with their secret." The explanation should have sounded like the rationalization of a man driven to madness by isolation. Yet Ethan found he couldn't dismiss it. His own experiences with Runt had shown him that something extraordinary was happening with this lynx family, something that defied conventional scientific understanding. "There's a threat," Ethan said, deciding to focus on the immediate concern. A development company is building a resort nearby. The construction is already disrupting the Lynx territory, and they're actively working to weaken the protection protocols. Aaron's face darkened. I've heard the machines. The vibrations reach even here. He looked to the mother Lynx, then back to Ethan. We need to stop them. This valley isn't just ecologically important. It's a historical site that documents a relationship between species that science has never recognized. I have help coming, Ethan told him. Dr. Maya Reynolds, a wildlife behaviorist, and Dr. Sarah Thompson from the local rehabilitation center. With your journal and photographs, plus the archaeological evidence here, we might be able to establish legal protection for the entire area. Aaron nodded slowly, but Ethan could see the hesitation in his brother's eyes. You've been officially missing, presumed dead for 15 years, Ethan said gently. Coming back now, it would mean a lot of questions. I'm not ready for that, Aaron admitted. Not yet, but I'll help in any way I can to protect this place. As dawn approached, Ethan and Aaron formulated a plan. Aaron would remain hidden for now, but would compile all his research on the Lynx family and the archaeological evidence. Ethan would bring Maya and Sarah to the main cave chamber, presenting the archaeological findings and the unusual Lynx behavior as evidence for special protection status. If necessary, if the legal battle required more definitive proof, Aaron would consider revealing himself. I should get back, Ethan said eventually. Maya will be arriving soon, and I need to prepare her for what she's going to see. Aaron looked momentarily panicked at the thought of his brother leaving, then composed himself. Will you come back? As soon as I can, Ethan promised. And, Aaron, for what it's worth, I never gave up on you, even when everyone else did. The brothers embraced, 15 years of separation compressed into a moment of connection that transcended words. When they finally parted, Aaron said, The cubs will guide you back. They know the safest routes, especially in this weather. Sure enough, all three cubs, including Runt, led Ethan through the forest with confidence, navigating the storm-altered landscape with ease. By the time they reached the edge of the clearing where his cabin stood, the rain had diminished to a gentle drizzle, and the first true light of dawn was breaking through the clouds. Maya's rental car was already parked outside, and Maya herself was standing on the porch, looking simultaneously impressed and skeptical as Ethan emerged from the forest with 3 lynx cubs trotting alongside him. When you said you had living proof, she called, I didn't expect quite such a dramatic entrance. Ethan couldn't help but smile, despite the emotional turmoil of the morning's discovery. Maya Reynolds, meet the extraordinary Lynx family I've been telling you about. Maya approached cautiously, her scientific training evident in how she observed the cubs without making sudden movements. This is highly unusual behavior, she admitted. Wild lynx, especially recently released rehabilitated animals, should be exhibiting significant flight response to human presence. This is just the beginning, Ethan told her. I need you to keep an open mind about what I'm going to show you and what I'm going to tell you. Maya's expression was one of professional interest, mixed with personal concern for her old friend. Ethan, you know I respect your observational skills. If you believe something extraordinary is happening here, I'm willing to consider it scientifically. Odile. As he led Maya inside, Ethan felt a renewed sense of purpose. With Aaron alive, with the evidence they had accumulated, and with scientific experts like Maya and Sarah to validate their findings, they stood a real chance of protecting the valley and the remarkable Lynx family that called it home. The storm had passed, leaving the forest washed clean and renewed. As Sarah's SUV pulled up outside the cabin, joining Maya's car, Ethan watched the lynx cubs retreat to the forest edge, where they waited, observing the gathering of humans with their characteristic intelligence. "I have something incredible to show you both," Ethan told Sarah and Maya as they gathered around his kitchen table. "Something that will change everything we thought we knew about the relationship between humans and wildlife in this valley." As he laid out the evidence, Aaron's journal and photographs, his own documentation of Runt's unusual behavior, and the images of the cave petroglyphs, Ethan felt a certainty that transcended scientific skepticism. The truth of what was happening in these woods was more profound than any academic paper could capture, more significant than any legal protection status could acknowledge. It was a story of connection across species, a bond forged through generations of mutual respect and protection. And as Ethan glanced out the window to where Runt sat watching, golden eyes reflecting the morning light, he knew that this story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning to be fully understood. In the days that followed, as Maya and Sarah helped document the archaeological site and the Lynx family's unusual behavior, as legal proceedings were initiated to halt Bradford's development. On the grounds of historical preservation, as the media began to take interest in the extraordinary claims being made about the relationship between humans and lynx in this remote corner of Olympic National Park, Ethan kept his promise to return to the hidden cave chamber daily. Sometimes he brought supplies, fresh food, books, small comforts from the world Aaron had left behind. Sometimes he simply sat with his brother, listening to the stories of 15 years lived in harmony with the forest and its most elusive inhabitants. And always, the Lynx family moved between these two worlds, bridges between human understanding and wild wisdom. On a clear autumn evening, as Ethan sat on his porch with Runt curled nearby, he watched the sunset paint the forest in shades of gold that matched the lynx's watchful eyes. The legal battle was far from over, but the preliminary injunction against Bradford's development had bought them time. Aaron was slowly considering the possibility of re-emergence, of sharing his extraordinary knowledge with a world that desperately needed to remember its connection to the wild. There was something almost sacred in this newfound equilibrium, a harmony that echoed the ancient relationship depicted in the cave petroglyphs. As winter approached, the archaeological site was officially designated for protection, with a team of researchers working alongside indigenous representatives to properly document the historical significance of the human-lynx relationship in the valley. Bradford's development was permanently halted, the land rezoned as a conservation area with special cultural significance. Aaron, with Ethan's support, had begun the slow process of reintegrating into society. He still spent most of his time in the forest, but now, as an officially recognized wildlife researcher, his unique insights into lynx behavior forming the foundation for a revolutionary approach to conservation that recognized the cognitive and cultural capabilities of animals, traditionally viewed as merely instinctual. Sarah and Maya had become regular visitors to Ethan's cabin, their professional interest in the Lynx family gradually evolving into a deeper appreciation for the special connection that had been forged across species. Sarah, in particular, found herself drawn not only to the scientific marvel unfolding before them, but to the quiet man who had recognized it first. On a crisp December morning, as Ethan and Sarah walked the now familiar trail to the main cave, entrance, Runt and his siblings bounding ahead of them through the light snow, Ethan reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them all together. "I never expected to find my brother," he said, watching his breath form clouds in the cold air. "But in looking for him, I found something else, a connection to this place and these remarkable animals that changed everything." Sarah smiled, her gloved hand finding his. Some connections transcend understanding. They simply need to be honored. As they reached the clearing before the cave, they found Aaron waiting with the mother lynx by his side, a tableau that perfectly captured the bridge between worlds that had been rebuilt in this quiet corner of the forest. Behind them, Etched into the ancient stone wall, generations of humans and lynx moved together through time, guardians of a wisdom that had nearly been lost, but now, against all odds, had been rediscovered. A reminder that sometimes the most profound relationships are formed in silence, in small acts of care that cross the boundaries we believe separate us from the wild. Dear listeners, we hope that Ethan and Aaron's extraordinary journey through the wilderness has touched your hearts. The story of connection between humans and nature reminds us of the deep bonds that can form when we truly open ourselves to understanding the world around us. For more emotionally captivating stories like this one, we've prepared a special playlist. Find it by clicking on the link to your left. If this tale of brotherhood and unexpected friendship across species moved you, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day, we bring you unique stories that explore the complexity and beauty of life's unexpected connections. We look forward to reading your thoughts in the comments below. What wild creature has touched your life in a meaningful way? Your story could inspire our next narrative.